Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The email pinged on my laptop late one Tuesday afternoon. I was half-heartedly scrolling through a gardening forum, trying to figure out why my prize-winning roses were looking a bit peaky this year. Coffee? Mark was the subject line. Mark. Sarah's Mark. My brow furrowed. Sarah and I had been friends since college. A solid 30 years of shared triumphs and too many tears to count. Mark had come into the picture about 15 years ago, a quiet, steady presence who I'd always thought complemented Sarah's more flamboyant personality perfectly. I liked Mark. He was kind, had a dry wit that surfaced at unexpected moments, and clearly adored Sarah. But an email from him, just to me, that was new. My first thought, a jolt of unease, was that something was wrong with Sarah. I clicked open the email, my heart doing a little nervous tap dance. Hi, Eleanor. It read, "Hope you're having a good week. I was wondering if you might be free to grab a coffee sometime soon. There's something I'd like to get your perspective on. Let me know what your schedule looks like. Best, Mark." Perspective on what? Not Sarah, then, or he'd have said. At least, I hoped not. We saw each other, the three of us, or Sarah and I alone, regularly. Dinners, barbecues in their lovely backyard, my disastrous attempts to teach them both how to make sourdough bread. But Mark and I on our own? Never. It wasn't that kind of friendship. He was Sarah's husband, a friendly appendage to our core bond. If you will, that sounds a bit dismissive, and I don't mean it to be. He was a good man, a good husband to my friend, and I respected him for that. But a solo coffee? The request felt oddly formal, like a business inquiry, almost, yet the brevity made it personal. I leaned back in my chair, the rose forum forgotten. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across my living room, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. My apartment, usually my sanctuary, suddenly felt very quiet. Why would Mark want my perspective on something? And why not ask Sarah? Or if it was something he couldn't discuss with Sarah, why me? We weren't confidants. We talked about books sometimes, shared a similar taste in old movies, and he'd occasionally ask my advice on a gift for Sarah if he was really stuck. But this felt different. There was an undercurrent I couldn't quite decipher. My mind, prone to overthinking at the best of times, started to churn. Was this about their marriage? Was he unhappy? Oh, Lord, I hoped not. I wouldn't know what to do with that kind of information. Sarah was my friend. My loyalty was to her first and foremost. Could I even be objective? I chewed on my lower lip. Maybe it was something completely innocuous. Maybe he was planning a surprise party for Sarah and wanted my input. That seemed plausible. Her birthday was in a couple of months. Or perhaps he was considering a career change, and knowing I'd navigated a similar path a few years back, wanted some practical advice. That felt less likely. He seemed very settled in his architectural firm. The cursor blinked patiently on the screen, where I'd normally type an immediate reply. I'm usually pretty quick with emails, but this one had me stumped. There was a subtle tension in the air, an unspoken question mark hanging over his simple request. It was like one of those detective novels I loved, where a seemingly innocent remark sets off a whole chain of discoveries. I found myself rereading his short message, searching for clues between the lines. Get your perspective on. It was vague, deliberately, so perhaps. I considered calling Sarah, casually mentioning it. Oh, by the way, Mark emailed me about coffee. Any idea what that's about? But something stopped me. If it was sensitive, something he wasn't ready to share with her, My inquiry might put her in an awkward position or make Mark uncomfortable. No, if he'd reached out to me directly, I should probably respect that directness, at least for now. My little calico cat, Daisy, hopped onto my lap, purring like a tiny motor and demanding attention. I stroked her soft fur, her rhythmic vibrations usually a source of calm. But today, my mind was elsewhere, circling Mark's invitation. It wasn't a demand, just a polite request. I could say no, plead a busy schedule, but curiosity, that persistent human trait, was starting to win out over my apprehension. And beneath the curiosity, there was something else too, a faint, unexpected flutter of, well, not excitement exactly, but intrigue. It had been a long time since anything truly unexpected had happened in my quiet, orderly life. My days were comfortable, predictable, maybe a little too predictable. I looked around my living room at the familiar comfort of my books, my art, the slightly worn armchair I'd inherited from my grandmother. It was a good life, a life I had carefully curated. But perhaps, just perhaps, a small deviation from the script wouldn't be unwelcome. And if Mark, a man I respected, felt he needed to talk to me, maybe I owed him the courtesy of listening, as long as it didn't compromise my friendship with Sarah. That was the line in the sand, with a sigh that was part resignation, part anticipation. I leaned forward and typed my reply. Hi, Mark. Thanks for reaching out. Coffee sounds nice. How about Thursday? I'm free around 10. We could try that little place on Elm Street, the Daily Grind. If that works for you, best, Eleanor. I hit send before I could second guess myself. Thursday, 2 days away. Enough time to prepare, though what I was preparing for, I had no earthly idea. The dust motes continued their silent dance in the sunbeams, seemingly oblivious to the small ripple of uncertainty that had just entered my usually placid world. The next 2 days passed in a bit of a haze. I tried to busy myself, replanting the struggling roses with fresh compost, tackling a particularly daunting pile of ironing, even starting a new jigsaw puzzle, a sprawling landscape of the Scottish Highlands. Anything to keep my mind from replaying Mark's email and my own myriad speculations. Sarah called on Wednesday evening, her usual breezy self, full of news about a difficult client at her interior design firm and a hilarious mishap involving a runaway Roomba and their dog, Buster. I listened, laughed at the right places, offered sympathetic noises, but a part of me felt strangely distant, like I was harboring a small, peculiar secret. I didn't mention the coffee invitation. It felt like Mark's news to share, or not share with Sarah. If he wanted her to know, he would have told her, or CC'd her on the email. My decision to keep it to myself for now solidified. I just hoped it was the right one. Thursday morning dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect late spring days where the air feels fresh and full of promise. I found myself taking a little more care with my appearance than usual. Nothing dramatic, just a touch more mascara, my favorite teal-colored linen shirt, the one that always got compliments. I told myself it was because the daily grind was a bit more upscale than my usual haunts, but a small, honest voice whispered it might have more to do with the unusual nature of the meeting. I wanted to feel composed, ready for whatever this conversation might bring. The daily grind was bustling when I arrived a few minutes before 10. The aroma of freshly roasted coffee and warm pastries enveloped me like a comforting hug. It was a popular spot, all exposed brick, reclaimed wood tables, and the gentle hum of conversations. I scanned the tables, a flicker of nerves returning. What if he wasn't here? What if he'd changed his mind? Then I saw him tucked away in a quieter corner by the window, already seated, a half-empty cup in front of him. He was looking out at the street, a thoughtful expression on his face. He hadn't seen me yet. For a moment, I just observed him. Mark was a good-looking man, in a quiet, understated way. Not conventionally handsome, perhaps, but he had kind eyes, crinkled at the corners from smiling, and a thatch of sandy brown hair that always seemed to fall boyishly over his forehead, no matter how often he pushed it back. He was dressed casually in a navy polo shirt and chinos. Seeing him there, alone, waiting for me, felt different. It shifted him just slightly from Sarah's husband to simply Mark, a person in his own right with his own agenda, his own reasons for seeking me out. I took a breath and walked towards him. He looked up as I approached, and a warm smile spread across his face, instantly easing some of my lingering apprehension. "Eleanor," he said, standing up, "thanks for coming." His voice was as I remembered it, calm and gentle. "Of course, Mark," I replied, trying to sound more nonchalant than I felt. "Good to see you." We did that slightly awkward dance of whether to shake hands or not. We weren't really handshaking acquaintances, but this wasn't a casual barbecue hug situation either. We settled for mutual smiles and him gesturing to the empty chair opposite him. "Can I get you something?" he asked as I settled in. "Their lattes are pretty good here." "A latte sounds perfect," I said. He caught the eye of a passing waitress and ordered for me, remembering I liked skim milk. A small detail, but it registered. He was observant. Once the waitress had bustled off, an initial silence fell between us, not uncomfortable, but not entirely relaxed either. It was the kind of silence that waits to be filled, expectant. I fiddled with the sugar packets in the little ceramic dish on the table. He took a sip of his coffee. The ambient noise of the cafe, the clatter of cups, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low murmur of other conversations, seemed to fade slightly, as if our little table was in its own bubble. So I began deciding to gently nudge things along. "How have you been, besides planning coffee rendezvous with your wife's friends? That is," I tried for a light tone, a little joke to break the ice. He chuckled, a soft, genuine sound. "I've been all right, Eleanor. Busy with work, the usual. And you? How are those prize-winning roses of yours doing?" "Don't ask," I grimaced playfully. "They're currently staging a rebellion. I suspect aphids, or perhaps just a deep-seated resentment of my gardening skills." He smiled. "Sarah mentioned you were having a bit of a battle with them." So they did talk about me. Of course they did. That was normal. The waitress arrived with my latte, placing it carefully before me, with a little flourish of latte art, a surprisingly well-executed swan. I thanked her, taking a moment to admire it before stirring in a half packet of sugar. The warmth of the cup felt good in my hands. "Well," Mark said, leaning back slightly in his chair, his gaze direct now, the earlier thoughtfulness replaced by a more focused intensity. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked you here." I took a sip of my latte. It was, as he promised, very good. The thought had crossed my mind. Yes, I admitted meeting his eyes. The subtle tension I'd sensed in his email was palpable now, a quiet hum beneath the surface of our polite exchange. This was it, the reason for the out-of-the-blue invitation. I braced myself, unsure what to expect, but determined to listen with an open mind and an open heart for Sarah's sake. And perhaps I was beginning to realize for my own as well. The clinking of a spoon against china from a nearby table seemed unusually loud in the momentary quiet that followed his words. Mark looked down at his coffee cup for a moment, tracing the rim with his finger. It was a small, unconscious gesture, but it spoke volumes about his own slight nervousness. When he looked up again, His expression was serious, but also surprisingly vulnerable. "It's about Sarah," he began, and my stomach gave a little lurch. Oh no, here it comes, I thought. The marital woes, the secret unhappiness. I prepared my best sympathetic, yet neutral expression. But then he continued, well, not directly about Sarah, but more about something for Sarah, something I'm trying to do for her, and I'm a bit stuck. I value your opinion. Eleanor, you've known her for so long, and you understand her in ways I sometimes feel I'm still learning even after all these years. Relief washed over me, so potent it was almost dizzying. Not marital problems. Something for Sarah. That was a landscape I felt much more comfortable navigating. Oh, I said, perhaps a little too brightly. Well, I'm happy to help if I can, Mark. What's on your mind? He leaned forward a little, lowering his voice slightly, even though the cafe was noisy enough to afford us a good deal of privacy. It's her 50th birthday in August, as you know, he said, and I want to do something really special. Not just a party, though we'll probably do that too, but something more personal, something that really speaks to who she is. I nodded slowly, understanding. Sarah wasn't a woman who was easily impressed by grand, impersonal gestures. She valued thoughtfulness, genuine sentiment. That sounds like a wonderful idea, Mark. The thing is, he continued, a slight frown creasing his brow. I have this idea, but I'm not sure if it's right or if I can even pull it off. And frankly, you're the only other person I can think of who loves old, dusty things and forgotten stories as much as she does. He offered a small, self-deprecating smile. Now I was intrigued. Old, dusty things and forgotten stories. I echoed, a smile playing on my own lips. You're speaking my language. What have you got in mind? He took a deep breath. You know how much she loves that old Victorian house her grandmother used to own? The one up in Willow Creek, where she spent summers as a kid. I knew it well. Sarah had spoken of it often, her voice always taking on a wistful, dreamy quality. It was her happy place, full of cherished childhood memories, a repository of family history. The house had been sold off years ago, after her grandmother passed, a source of quiet regret for Sarah, who had always dreamed of one day buying it back, though it was financially out of reach. Of course, I said, she adored that place. She still talks about the attic crammed with treasures and the rambling garden with the ancient apple tree. Mark's eyes lit up. Exactly. Well, I've been doing some research, just idly at first. Online property listings, local historical societies. And I found out that the current owners, an elderly couple, are looking to sell. Quietly. They haven't listed it officially yet. He paused, toolbox in hand, and looked at me. There was a moment of silence where I suddenly worried I'd overstepped, presumed too much. But then his smile returned, wider this time, reaching his eyes and making them crinkle even more. Carol, that's incredibly kind of you. I don't think Sarah or I could say no to that. Homemade beef stew sounds amazing. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a quiet warmth. Wonderful, I said, my voice brighter than it had been in days. Just let me get it for you. I hurried to the kitchen, my steps lighter than they'd been all morning. The aroma of the stew, which had been simmering gently, suddenly seemed richer, more inviting. I found a couple of large containers and ladled generous portions into them, my heart feeling surprisingly full. It was such a simple thing, sharing food, but it felt significant, a way to extend the warmth of the morning, to repay his kindness in a way that felt personal and genuine. When I returned to the living room, he was standing by the newly fixed door, looking out through the clean screen. The sunlight streamed in, and for a moment, he seemed almost a part of the house, a familiar, comforting presence. He turned as I approached, taking the containers with a grateful murmur. "This looks and smells incredible, Carol," he said, his eyes meeting mine. And in that look, I saw something more than just gratitude for Stu. I saw a flicker of that same quiet understanding that had been present all morning, a recognition of a shared moment that was, in its own way, quite special. "I hope you both enjoy it," I said, walking him to the now perfectly functioning screen door. He opened it, and it swung outward with a smooth, satisfying whisper. "We will," he assured me. He stepped onto the porch, then turned back. "Thank you again for the lemonade, Carol, and for the conversation." "Thank you, Mark," I replied, my voice a little softer than I intended. "For everything, the door, it's made such a difference already." He nodded, that kind smile still in place. "Take care, Carol." "You too, Mark." And then he was gone, walking down the porch steps and across the lawn towards his own house, the containers of stew swinging gently by his side. I stood there for a moment, watching him go, the screen door resting perfectly in its frame. The house felt quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't the hollow silence of loneliness. It was a softer, more peaceful quiet, imbued with the lingering warmth of his presence, the echo of our shared conversation, and the satisfying click of a mended door. I turned back into my living room. The dust motes still danced in the sunlight, but the room didn't feel quite so faded anymore. It felt touched. I walked over to Tom's armchair and sat down, really sat down in it, for the first time in what felt like years, without that familiar pang of grief being the dominant emotion. Instead, I felt a gentle sense of contentment, and something else too, a sense of awakening. What had happened was simple on the surface. My neighbor's husband came to fix the door, but it was what happened within that simplicity that had shocked me in the quietest, most unexpected way. It was the shock of connection, the surprise of feeling a genuine human warmth when I hadn't even realized how cold I'd become. It was the realization that even in the ordinary course of a Tuesday morning, something could shift, something could open up, not unlike the newly repaired door. And as I sat there, in the stillness of my home, I felt a profound sense of gratitude and a nascent stirring of hope, a feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, there were still new doors to be opened in my life. The experience wasn't dramatic, no fireworks or grand declarations. It was something far more precious, a quiet mutual respect, a gentle unfurling of shared humanity between two people who had, until that morning, been little more than distant neighbors. It was a reminder that kindness exists, that connection can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes all it takes is a broken door to let a little light in. And that, I realized, was a truly wonderful kind of shock. The rest of the day passed in a gentle haze of reflection. Every time I walked past the screen door, perfectly aligned and secure, I felt a small jolt of pleasure, not just for its repaired state, but for what its mending had represented. Mark's quiet competence had not only fixed a physical part of my home, but had also, in a way, patched up a little corner of my spirit. It wasn't that I was suddenly a different person, but rather that a part of me that had been dormant, perhaps a little walled off since Tom's passing, had been gently nudged awake. Late that afternoon, Sarah called. Her voice was full of warmth. "Carol, that stew was absolutely divine. Mark couldn't stop raving about it, and the kids even asked for seconds, which, believe me, is high praise." I smiled, genuinely pleased. "Oh, I'm so glad you all enjoyed it, Sarah. It was the least I could do. Mark was such a help with the door. It's like new. He really enjoyed meeting you properly," Sarah continued. He came home saying how nice it was to chat with you. He said your lemonade was the best he's ever had, by the way. I chuckled. He's a flatterer. But her words warmed me. It was nice to know the feeling of connection had been mutual. No, he meant it. Sarah insisted. He also said, well, he said, you have a lovely way about you, Carol, a real gentleness. He's often quiet, Mark is, but he observes a lot, you know? Her words caught me off guard. A lovely way about me. Gentleness? It had been a long time since anyone had said something like that to me, or perhaps a long time since I'd been able to truly hear it. I felt a faint blush rise again. That's that's very kind of him to say, Sarah. Well, it's true, she said simply. Anyway, I just wanted to call and say thank you again. And Carol, if you ever need anything else, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask Mark or me. We're just next door. Thank you, Sarah. That means a lot, I said, and I truly meant it. The barrier between our houses, once just a fence, now felt like less of a division and more like a friendly boundary between connected lives. After we hung up, I wandered into my small garden. The roses Mark had commented on did look a bit straggly. I remembered his gentle suggestion about pruning. Maybe I would tackle that tomorrow. Maybe it was time to tend to a few other neglected things too, not just in the garden, but in my life. His visit had reminded me of the simple satisfaction of making things right, of nurturing and mending. Later that evening, as dusk settled, I sat on my porch swing, a light blanket over my lap, even though the air was still mild. The newly fixed screen door stood as a silent sentinel. I could hear the distant sounds of the neighborhood, children's laughter fading as bedtime approached, the murmur of a television from a nearby house, the chirp of crickets tuning up for their nightly symphony. These were familiar sounds, yet tonight they felt different, less like a backdrop to my solitude, and more like a comforting presence, a reminder that I was part of a larger tapestry, even if my own thread had felt a little frayed lately. Walking out of the daily grind and into the bright sunshine, I felt different, lighter. The world seemed a little more vibrant, a little more full of interesting possibilities than it had just a few hours before. My quiet, orderly life hadn't been upended, but a new, exciting thread had been woven into its fabric. The initial apprehension I'd felt about his invitation had completely dissolved, replaced by a quiet thrill of anticipation and a surprising warmth towards Mark. He was still Sarah's husband, of course, but he was also now my co-conspirator, my friend. I thought about Sarah, about how utterly overwhelmed and overjoyed she would be if Mark managed to pull this off. The sheer, unadulterated delight on her face would be a sight to behold, and I would get to be a part of making that happen in my own small way. It was a wonderful feeling. Reaching my apartment, I paused before putting my key in the lock. The familiar comfort of my home felt different now, too. Not less comforting, but perhaps a little less complete. The conversation with Mark had opened a small window, letting in a breeze of shared purpose and connection that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. It wasn't about romance, not for me with Mark anyway, but about the joy of shared human endeavor, of being part of something bigger than my own individual routine. Over the next few weeks, Mark kept me updated with brief, discreet emails. The negotiations with the owners were progressing slowly but surely. He'd had a more thorough inspection done, which revealed the expected list of age-related issues, but nothing catastrophic. The house was, as he put it, a grand old lady, a bit neglected, but with excellent bones. My anticipation grew. With each email, I started sketching ideas for the restoration, pulling out my old art history books. researching Victorian-era wallpapers and garden designs. I felt a renewed sense underscore of creative energy, a spark I hadn't felt in years. My friendship with Sarah continued, as usual. We had our weekly lunches, our phone calls, our movie nights. It was a little strange sometimes sitting with her, chatting about everyday things, knowing this huge secret, this incredible surprise that was potentially brewing in the background. I felt a pang of guilt occasionally for holding something back, but I knew it was for the best possible reason. Mark's desire to make this a complete surprise for her was paramount, and my role, for now, was to be the silent, supportive ally. One afternoon, about a month after our coffee, Mark called. His voice was tense. "Eleanor, are you free to talk?" "Of course, Mark. What's up?" My heart rate quickened. "They've accepted our offer," he said, and then let out a shaky laugh. "I think I own a very old, very dusty, very expensive house in Willow Creek." A wave of exhilaration shot through me. "Mark, that's fantastic. Congratulations. Or condolences, depending on how you look at it." I joked. He chuckled. "A bit of both, I think. Now, the real work begins, and the real terror of keeping this from Sarah for the next few months." He paused. "Listen, the sellers are moving out at the end of next week. They've agreed to let me have the keys a little early to, as I put it, take some measurements for renovation estimates." Which is true, of course. I was wondering, would you be free to drive up there with me next Saturday to see it in person? Your first official consultation as my chief historical advisor. "I would be honored," I said, my mind already picturing the old house, waiting to share its secrets. "Next Saturday it is." The drive up to Willow Creek with Mark was comfortable and companionable. We talked easily, not just about the house, but about books we'd read, current events, even our respective childhoods. I learned that he'd grown up in a small town not unlike Willow Creek, and that he'd always had a quiet appreciation for old buildings, a stark contrast to the sleek, modern structures he designed for a living. It was like discovering hidden layers to someone you thought you knew, or at least thought you knew adequately. The house, when we finally pulled up to it, was even more imposing and more poignantly dilapidated than the photos had suggested. It stood on a slight rise, overlooking the town, a grand three-story Victorian with a wide wraparound porch, turrets, and intricate gingerbread trim that was peeling and, in some places, missing altogether. The garden was a wilderness, knee-high grass dotted with tenacious weeds. But here and there, I could see the ghost of its former glory, an ancient, gnarled rose bush struggling for light, the outline of what might have once been elegant flower beds. Mark fumbled with the old-fashioned key in the lock, and then the heavy oak door creaked open, releasing a sigh of musty air, the scent of decades of disuse, old wood, and damp plaster. "Well," he said, with a slightly nervous glance at me, "welcome to Hemlock House." Sarah had always called it that, after the old hemlock trees that once lined the property, though most were long gone. Stepping inside was like stepping back in time. Dust lay thick on every surface, cobwebs draped like macabre decorations. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grimy windows, casting the vast hallway in a dim, ethereal glow. But beneath the neglect, the beauty was undeniable. The sweeping staircase with its intricately carved newel post, the high ceilings with their ornate plaster medallions, the original hardwood floors scuffed and faded, but still solid. Wow, I breathed, turning in a slow circle. It's got presence, doesn't it?" Mark nodded, a look of mingled awe and apprehension on his face. "Presence and a whole lot of problems, I suspect." We spent the entire day there, moving from room to room, our footsteps echoing in the stillness. I took copious notes, sketched layouts, pointed out original features that were worth saving: a beautiful stained glass panel in the dining room, an old porcelain sink in the scullery that was cracked but charming, the surprisingly intact butler's pantry with its glass-fronted cabinets. Mark, with his architects, I pointed out structural issues, areas where the roof might need attention, the outdated wiring that would have to be completely redone. In what had once been the library, with empty shelves lining the walls and a faint, lingering scent of old paper and leather, we found a box of old photographs tucked away in a cupboard, sepia-toned images of stern-faced Victorians, flapper girls from the 20s, and then, startlingly, photos of a young girl with bright, mischievous eyes and pigtails, Sarah as a child, laughing on the porch swing, holding a bouquet of flowers from the garden, peering out of an attic window. Mark picked one up, a photo of Sarah, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, standing proudly beside an enormous snowman. A soft smile touched his lips. "This is why we're doing this," he said quietly, more to himself than to me. "For her, for these memories." In that moment, any lingering doubt I might have had about the project, any concern about the enormity of the task, vanished. Seeing that photograph, seeing the look on Mark's face, I knew this was more than just a renovation project. It was an act of profound love, a reclaiming of joy, a bridge to the past, and a gift to the future. As we explored the dusty attic, filled with forgotten remnants of lives lived long ago, old trunks, a dressmaker's dummy, a child's rocking horse covered in a ghostly shroud of cobwebs, I felt a deep sense of connection not just to Sarah and Mark, but to the house itself, to the generations who had lived and dreamed within its walls. This wasn't just about restoring a building, it was about honoring its stories. The experience was deeply emotional, but in a way that was cleansing and inspiring. It was about shared history, shared purpose. The mutual respect between Mark and me deepened that day. He listened intently to my observations, valued my insights, and I, in turn, was continually impressed by his dedication, his quiet determination, and the sheer depth of his affection for Sarah that fueled this extraordinary undertaking. By the time we locked up the house late that afternoon, covered in dust and tired but exhilarated, a plan was beginning to form. We knew what needed to be done urgently, what could wait, what would have the most impact for Sarah's initial surprise. The climax of this particular journey wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a sudden romantic revelation, but the quiet, solidifying realization of a shared, beautiful goal. It was the moment the dream began to feel real, tangible, driving back as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. I felt a profound sense of contentment. This unexpected invitation for coffee had led to something far richer and more meaningful than I could ever have imagined. It had led to a new dimension in my friendship with Mark, a deeper appreciation for the man he was, and an exciting, creative project that filled me with a sense of purpose. More than that, it had allowed me a glimpse into the extraordinary power of a truly thoughtful gesture, the kind that speaks directly to the heart. It reaffirmed my belief in the enduring strength of love and connection. My personal discovery was that even in the quiet routines of midlife, unexpected opportunities for joy, for connection, for contributing to something beautiful could arise. All it took was an open mind, a willingness to step slightly outside one's comfort zone, and perhaps an email inviting you for coffee. The months leading up to Sarah's birthday were a whirlwind of clandestine activity. Mark was a master of subterfuge, arranging contractor meetings under the guise of site visits for a potential new client and spending weekends at hardware store workshops when he was actually at Hemlock House, overseeing the initial crucial repairs. I became his sounding board, his aesthetic guide, his confidant in this thrilling conspiracy. We pored over paint swatches, fabric samples, and antique lighting catalogs. We debated the merits of restoring the original clawfoot tub versus installing a more practical modern shower. The tub won, of course, for sheer romanticism. There were moments of panic, like when Sarah casually mentioned wanting to take a drive up to Willow Creek for old times' sake, and Mark had to invent a sudden, urgent work crisis to divert her, or when a particularly nosy neighbor of Hemlock House started asking questions about the renewed activity. But somehow we navigated it all. My respect for Mark's dedication, his meticulous planning, and his unwavering focus on Sarah's happiness grew with each passing week. The climax wasn't a single moment, but the gradual, magical transformation of the house. The peeling wallpaper gave way to historically appropriate, yet fresh, new patterns. The grimy windows were cleaned until they sparkled, letting light flood into the once gloomy rooms. The overgrown garden was tamed, the ancient rose bushes pruned and fed, hinting at future blooms. We focused on making a few key rooms habitable and beautiful for the reveal. The entryway, the living room, the kitchen, modernized but retaining a vintage charm. And what would be Sarah's study, overlooking the garden, filled with books and a comfortable armchair. Finally, the day of Sarah's 50th birthday arrived. Mark had arranged a small family dinner for the evening, but the real surprise was planned for the afternoon. He told Sarah he was taking her on a mystery trip. She, blissfully unaware, was excited and intrigued. He'd asked me to be at Hemlock House an hour before they arrived to make sure everything was perfect. Walking through the restored rooms that sunny August afternoon, I felt a lump in my throat. The house didn't just look beautiful. It felt alive again, humming with warmth and anticipation. Fresh flowers from the newly tended garden graced the mantelpiece. Sunlight streamed through the clean windows, illuminating the polished wood floors. The scent of beeswax and lemon oil mingled with the faint, sweet perfume of old roses. It was ready. When Mark's car pulled up, I hid myself in the newly renovated kitchen, my heart pounding. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, the car doors opening, Sarah's voice, curious and excited. "Mark, where on earth are we? This looks familiar." Then silence, a long, drawn-out silence. I could picture Mark leading her up the porch steps, fumbling with the key, just as he had with me all those months ago. I heard the creak of the front door, and then a gasp, a sound so full of astonishment and disbelief that it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I couldn't resist. I peeked around the kitchen door. Sarah was standing in the grand hallway, her hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide as saucers. Tears were streaming down her face. Mark stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Mark, how is this?" she stammered, her voice choked with emotion. "Happy birthday, my love," he said softly. "Welcome home." She turned to him, her face a canvas of overwhelming emotion, shock, joy, disbelief, and a love so profound it filled the entire house. They embraced, a long, desperate hug that spoke volumes. And then Sarah just wept, great, heaving sobs of pure, unadulterated happiness. Later, after the initial shock had subsided into a radiant joy, after she'd wandered through the restored rooms in a daze, touching everything, tears still glistening on her cheeks, Mark brought her into the kitchen. "There's someone else who helped make this happen," he said. When Sarah saw me, she just stared for a moment, and then her face crumpled again, and she rushed forward to hug me, so tightly I could barely breathe. "Eleanor, you knew? You were in on this." Every step of the way, I laughed, hugging her back. I have no words," she said, looking from me to Mark and back again, her eyes shining. "This is This is the most incredible gift anyone has ever given me. It's more than a house. It's everything. That evening, as a small group of us, close family and me, gathered in the newly furnished dining room of Hemlock House, raising a toast to Sarah, I looked at my friend. She was glowing, incandescent with happiness. Mark sat beside her, his hand resting on hers, a quiet smile of deep satisfaction on his face. The unexpected invitation for coffee had led to this moment of profound joy, to the rekindling of old dreams, to a testament of enduring love. It had been a journey of emotional connection, not in the way one might initially assume from a clickbait title, but in a far more enriching and complex way. It was about the connection between a husband and wife, deepened by an extraordinary act of love. It was about the connection between dear friends, strengthened by shared secrets and a common goal. And for me, it was about the discovery that stepping into the unknown, even for something as simple as a cup of coffee, can lead to unexpected adventures, personal growth, and the quiet satisfaction of helping to create a little bit of magic in the world. The subtle tension of that first email had resolved into this beautiful, harmonious chord, and I knew, with a certainty that warmed me from the inside out, that this was a story I would cherish for the rest of my days. The house stood as a testament, not just to Sarah's history, but to the beautiful, unexpected ways human hearts can connect